thank you so much for joining us, and delighted to be talking today about using AI to enable transformation into new business models. We've got a really great panel. Really delighted to introduce our panelists. We've got the head of product marketing from Google Cloud. Really delighted to have you with us. Thank you so much. And what a great topic this is, talking about AI to enable business model transformation. And we touched a little bit on that in the keynotes this morning. So, Raj, maybe we can speak a little bit to you and tell us a little bit about what you're doing. I know prior to this event, we had a good conversation, and we talked, much more about how AT&T are now going, beyond kind of that network co-pilot. So, can you share much more about that? How you kind of started out, and now how you kind of on that journey to synthetic data generation?
Great, and thank you, Aaron, and great to be here. So, just a little bit of context for where I'm situated at AT&T. I'm part of the network CTO organization, so a lot of what we work with is network data and network data exposed from our network elements. And as we've kind of looked at the use cases that are uniquely positioned from generative properties, synthetic data has kind of stood out for us as a great opportunity. And it crosses many interesting places. The first time we kind of started looking at it was had a compliance opportunity where we were trying to minimize how much customer data and network data we were storing, and we thought we could regenerate it with the properties using synthetic data. So that was kind of the starting point. And we started that with more, typical LLM-based approaches. But as we kind of saw the opportunity, we actually expanded it to drive synthetic data generation into things like complex test case and test and measurement cases in lab environments, to time series use cases in forecasting. And now we're actually extending it into predictive use cases for our closed loop, and also in some monetization cases with network APIs, where we are working with OEMs on doing threat analytics and anomaly detection. And it's really important, as we're working with our network partners like Nokia and cloud partners like Google Cloud, where all these kind of come together in actually ultimately driving valuable opportunities.
Yeah, we've seen that. I spent a lot of my career lately looking at autonomous networks, and that anomaly detection becomes really important to do that. Brian, obviously, from your perspective, working with not just AT&T, but globally, lots of partners, where are you seeing these business and use cases really driving, and the work you're doing with Google?
So when we look at generative AI and what's happening in the marketplace, we're looking across all industries. And one of the spotlights for us is really in that contact center. And it's no mystery that contact centers are very large at our operators. And so that's a place where it's inherent and there's proven ROI. It's very easy to get after. We've moved from text to multimodal. So now you can have voice, you can have video, and you have the kind of tokens with Gemini and Gemini Flash, 2 million and 1 million tokens, where you can turn those conversations very quickly. So we see it's moved from IVRs to chatbots to agents. Full-fledged live agents where you feel like you're having those interactions. One of our customers is Bell Canada, and they have implemented their agent, and the focus of that is to take this agent and get those inquiries from customers into a self-service mode. So containment and deflection, if you will. If you have kids or anybody young, the last thing they want to do is talk to a human. So this is becoming more valuable, right? So what they're now doing is they've succeeded to some degree, and they have over $20 million in savings this year. And across their properties with Bell Canada and Virgin Media, they have over 1.1 million calls handled through that process. So that's a pretty ripe area. And I know we do quite a bit of work with AT&T in this space as well. So it's something that we see taking off and being part of that low-hanging fruit.
And Jitin, it's really interesting what Brian was talking about there. And a lot of the use cases we see today, of course, are about driving efficiencies. If you look at, anomaly detection, as Raj was talking about that, so it can, fit the network, not only faster, but also more efficiently. I think that's so important. Brian's talking about chat bots and engines, but we often just look at kind of the operator side in savings. So how can we leverage kind of, what the companies like Nokia are doing? Because actually those savings also transcend all the way down to what you guys are working on.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, Aaron. And, I find this panel very interesting. And I got to say that because, I was just annotating back in the room that no longer networks are built between a service provider and a network equipment vendor. Now we have a triangulation with hyperscalers coming in, especially with the advent of cloud and AI. So I find this discussion very, very meaningful. Stepping back and looking at some of the use cases, two things that we need to understand, right? We are actually in the 2.0 journey of AI. We started this 8-10 years back with the invent of ML. We have been talking about quite a bit of data and data sciences, but we are talking about data from a real-time, near real-time, but a more structured data context, right? So there's a lot of talk about that. And use cases like prediction, anomaly detection, classification, those kind of use cases has emerged quite a bit, right? So that's why we are talking about quite a bit of use cases on the ML side of things. What generative AI, from our perspective, is doing right now is introducing a conversational aspect to the networks, right? And I'll be very concrete and present two use cases that has really ticked off from our perspective. Take the context of private networks, right? We've got about 850 private networks out there, carpeted, non-carpeted industries. We are talking about automation floors and so on and so forth. And when you power on a private wireless network, typically a new guy who's getting onto the factory floor need to get an onboarding training to understand all these KPIs and panels and so on and so forth of how connectivity and apps are connected to that connected system. Just by introducing large language models and interpreting some of it, what we call as MX workmate, the MXC workmate, mission critical workmates, you can have a conversational aspects on various light indicators, various KPIs, how the machines are performing, and so on and so forth. So you're just simplifying that engagement with the network connectivity and applications around it. Another powerful one that we are starting to see quite a bit roll out, and that's more in the context of service providers, is around security, right? Security and security regulation is enormous, right? And we as Nokia deliver to 350 service providers worldwide. We see security regulations all over the world, right? And one of the biggest challenges we are seeing is this gap of understanding security and security regulations. So what we did was, and this is a fantastic use case because it bridges the ML or the traditional AI capabilities and the conversational capabilities. So what we were doing was we were doing anomaly detections on various security levels, pulling it out the network data, real-time, near real-time data, seeing vulnerabilities in management side, seeing vulnerabilities in the control plane, data planes of the network. And if you infuse this with 3GPP specifications and IST specifications, and then build a chatbot that helps you interpret that red, green, or amber light.
We're building an agent, no chatbot.
Yeah. Yes, that's correct. Actually, I'm glad, Brian, you called out. From a Nokia vision, we see an AI native network emerging where we call comms autonomous agents.
Yes.
In the space of services, in the space of care, in the space of networks, in the space of operations. And you will see several of these agents emerging on an AI native platform. And that's going to be the new journey for us for what you call an autonomous operations.
I mean, this is a big shift in networks, and this is really moving towards softwareization of the network. And this is something the telco industry's really struggled with. It's kind of the IT guys are ahead of the curve on this. And now it's coming down to practical operations, which is so interesting. And, Raj, with that, obviously, when we look at these use cases and things, we've got to get data, right? We've got to look at data generation, how we use that. And, I spent a lot of my life, particularly when I've got autonomous networks, working with operators, have access to that data. And it's been really challenging to have the dev teams to be able to look at that. So one way we touched on earlier was a bit around this synthetic data and looking at that as we look at foundational network models and kind of synthetic data generation. How do you manage kind of the balance, though, between kind of the cost and the accuracy of that as we start thinking about these various use cases? Because as Jitin said, if we're going to start talking to the network and using these chatbots, we need to know the health of it. And these are all really important use cases, but if we don't have access to data, we can't build the chatbots that we need.
So I'll say we are still top of the first inning on embracing this technology, but we already have kind of seen that estimating costs is very complex, both on the training and then the inferencing. Again, kind of piggybacking on what Brian and Jitin were saying, the NLP use cases and the ones that are both agentic based or just on kind of the chatbot, the context size, how long these conversations go. And as you start looking at it in the multimodal dimension, the costs go up as the contexts increase, because the number of tokens that are required, both in the input, increases. As the tokens increase, your output tokens per second actually goes down, and your unit cost per token goes up. So as we've kind of looked at it, we realized while we are, have a lot of data to work with, and that's a good problem to have, the data is not as well labeled, and the context associations are not there a priori. So we've kind of taken a look, and it's very recent. Like I said, it's I'm measuring some of this, like how you give a child's age in weeks and months here. We've been looking at network foundation models, small language models, where we are trying to train with our own data, kind of starting with transformer-based models, but things that are smaller, tens of millions of parameters, to allow us to kind of control those costs in there and try to kind of get ultimately the efficiency in latency, managing the context size, as well as the throughput. But it's a journey. I think we are early, but pretty encouraged by some of the models available across the spectrum. There are multiple models, including ones that are not transformer-based. There's some open source ones, like Carnegie Mellon has one called Mamba that takes a kind of a different approach instead of working at kind of a text or subtext level, looks at entire stream to kind of lower cost. So you're being opportunistic, but still early to kind of bend that cost curve.
Yes, just so this, Brian, maybe you can come in and talk about that.
Yeah, just building on some of that too, as you're talking about it. I mean, it's important not to rebuild silos and to have a platform-based approach. And then you can get the LLMs that you want in certain use cases. So we look at it from an AI hypercomputer perspective, and then leveraging Vertex AI on top of that. We're seeing Vodafone do that. We spent 5 years with them just creating data lakes and data oceans. That was a huge project. And it will be an ongoing project, yeah? But now they're set up to leverage AI. In this case, they can leverage a Vertex AI, which has over 160 models, large language models available to them. So now I'm not forcing you to choose Gemini. I hope you would, though. But you can use Claude, you can use all of the favorite models you want, because it's about using that for the right use case. And this is an open kind of platform-based approach that I think is required so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Yeah. And that becomes very, very critical as we move forward, because 5 years of data cleansing with lakes and oceans, and where should that reside? You can't just get rid of it. You're not flipping a switch.
Right.
By creating more processes and cleansing that data, eliminating processes. One of our operators eliminated 30% of their data and improved their processes through there. That's real cost savings. So you have to see that big picture and don't box yourself in at some point.
Yeah, I think that's important, is that long-term business vision. And sometimes that gets lost, particularly when we've got shareholders and looking at the investments we're starting to make. Brian, can I just probe you a little bit more? I mean, we were talking, about some use case scenarios, and we actually picked up on one which I find very interesting about field ops and data documentarization. So can you talk about kind of the work you've done there? And I think, Raj, you mentioned a bit about kind of, token usage. I know that's starting to change as well in how we're handling these volumes of data.
Yeah, so from a field ops perspective, we're seeing Gen AI penetrate the contact center. We're seeing it get into the employee work base and becoming more efficient. We're seeing it get into the field ops. This is all about, I listened a little bit earlier, it is about adoption though. it's not just talking about technology. It's what we can do. People are how are people adopting it? So I sat with Hisham Fahmy, who's the CIO at TELUS, and they're doing some very interesting things with our technology in this case, with field ops. They have over 4,000 agents, and they have a 70% adoption rate. I'm like, Hisham, how did you do that? He says, Brian, it's an app within their mobile device. So now you can do text, mobile, multimodal, turn it really quick. You go out to a cell site, you're laying fiber, what have you, and you're democratizing that data and really elevating that field tech's knowledge base. This is pretty critical. And he believes in elevating and democratizing that data because field techs, now you have a field tech that's been in the business 2 years. He doesn't have the tribal knowledge that someone working on your systems for 20 years will, or 15. But we can elevate that person up. You can get step-by-step directions, and Jitin, we talked about this too. That becomes very powerful.
Yes.
So now I've taken this person that has very little experience, and I've elevated them up to high productivity on a very critical asset, your network.
That's a fantastic point, and I'll probably jump on this. Often in this room, people will say, who's Nokia to talk about data, right? Because we tend to think that data is something with the service providers because they're operating the networks. And that was true for the first generation of AI. When we were talking about traditional AI, we are talking about more structured data and network data. With the generative piece of it, and especially talking about field ops, it's no secret that Nokia serves 350 service providers worldwide, right? So there is a one-to-many relationship where AT&T has many vendors in their network. We have a one-to-many relationship where we, as an NEP, is serving to 350 customers, right? And we have a huge army of services care professionals rolling out networks at giant speeds. Just this quarter, I've got, just rolling out 5G SA core. I've got 1,450 projects just this quarter rolling out 5G SA networks. So the amount of touch points we see in all these networks of how the networks are built, designed, operated, and cared is just enormous. So latching up to Brian's point, I think what we started to realize is, holy crap, we are seeing enormous set of data set and practices where we can help this industry transform how the networks are built, operated, managed using these LLM technologies. So one of the foundational pieces that what we are doing is like test automation generation, right? Across these network touch points, right? High level, low level design. I mean, Raj would know, it takes 6 to 9 months for designing a high level to a low level and excruciating rolling out any new service onto the network, let alone 5G SA, right?
Yeah.
How do we shorten that life cycle, right? Care, L1 to L4 ticketing costs is enormous, right? We have 35 email systems and huge amount of ServiceNows to Salesforce to all sorts of data ticketing that could be aggregated to it. So we're seeing enormous side of things. But I think, as in generative AI, they say, attention is all you need, right? That's how it started, right? We need to understand that there is attention that to be brought out by specialists in the network. So the way we are building this governance framework when we are operating in a services context or in a care context is bringing in the solution architect who is living, breathing, designing these high-level, low-level design. And as we are taking unstructured data of these high-level, low-level design, annotating it right for these large language models so that the telco context and attention is built into these models, right? So that's an interesting revelation, and I just wanted to share.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. Yeah. And Brian, what you said before was really important actually about how you can upskill a lot of your staff as well. I was in the 10100 back in DTW, and we're just talking about actually the skills is a real challenge. Maybe can you just explore that a little bit more about kind of, what's happening, at Google and how we're trying to upskill and get people access and that democratization, which is so important.
Yeah, so let me give you, I'm going to give you, this is not a telco answer, but this is any company answer. So I sit in the marketing department. How is marketing ready to take on AI? Where can that be useful? So we kind of look at Gen AI and say, we're moving from the wow to the how and the now. And it's happening across all the parts of the business like we're discussing up here. But even in marketing, my simple group, I have someone that's 1 year out of university. and we've shot multiple videos at DTW in Copenhagen. I said, give me a title and abstract, and give me some breakouts for that. The ability to pull out the right information for someone 1 year out of university is very difficult, not knowing the background of what we, the soup that we talk about up here. So use AI Studio, feed it in, and spit it out. I was quite amazed at how good it was.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's our assistant, and I don't care if it's an assistant for the marketeer or for the person rolling out 5G networks or for whomever. We have to get that agent and those assistants ready. And it sits open on my desktop, and I just feed it in.
Yeah, and we were with AT&T this week doing a hackathon. Actually, they were looking at some of those use cases and how you could use AI to get the context out of YouTube videos, for example.
I'm not even talking right now.
yeah, exactly. That's how good it's going to look. So, I really like what Brian said, about being ready in the now and the how. What's AT&T doing? How ready are you really, and the people to start using, AI on the network? Because it's a gamble, right? That you've got to take.
So I think I've got to talk. At the end of the day, AT&T is an operational company, right? I mean, much of the company is running the operations as Jitin described, from the planning phase to build and engineering to optimizing. There's one more phase, decommissioning, because we have various generations of technology, and it's actually harder to decommission than it is sometimes to put in there. So it's got this long tail there. And we've broken our use cases down into, classified them as high volume, low complexity. You have low volume, high complexity, and then you actually have high volume, high complexity. So as we kind of go through those and assess, that mapping, there are some that directly give us that great return on invested capital, because we see the benefit showing up much faster. But we're investing across the board, but the prioritization is based on within the operational life cycle where those use cases have the best advantage. I think the way we started with the contact center and those transcripts was a great place. But I think the next order of our use cases, the accuracy and the safe automation and things required even for autonomous networks becomes really challenging. To design, to manage a 5-9 network, your automation cannot be any less reliable. And there's this whole balance between centralized control and distributed and localized control, because as you're managing a network, you want that intelligence to be distributed. So it's part of taking the platform view that Brian offered, but kind of making it fluid, where that same capability is available all the way to the edge.
And that's really important, that fluidity on the network. I mean, we look at that at TM4, and we look at our levels of automation in autonomous networks. And overnight, your whole network's not going to be level 4, which I know is where everyone's looking at. And that's where we really start to embed things like generative AI. So that fluidity is really important, to make sure you've got the confidence in the network as well. Sorry, Brian, you want to come in?
Raj, can you give me a sense of how many use cases you've analyzed, and what's the heaviest quadrant across those?
As in the return on investment, or the...
You said you looked across the network and all these different use cases, and you have them in the different buckets.
So there are when we kind of look at the ones that have a lot of touch points, where it's a repeated task that has a high degree of what we call human scale intervention, that we can basically bring it into kind of machine scale, and bring in both predictive and decision making in there. That's usually in the place where the most touch points. That's in that field tech example, and in the contact center. And there's a place there, beyond kind of that expert assistant, where some of that synthetic data generation plays a role. So, imagine a customer, a contact center, working with a customer having a Wi-Fi problem in the home, and you're trying to determine under a specific Wi-Fi condition, what would that speed test be? Now, if you tell the customer, hey, can you run a speed test now? Think about how long that takes. can add minutes to the call. But with synthetic data generation, we can actually compute a synthetic speed test based on those conditions that we have extracted both on the devices in the home network, and the Wi-Fi conditions, and say, okay, now I understand what your pain point is. So it actually decreases the time that the agent is actually troubleshooting. At the same time, it provides a qualitatively a more complete piece of the puzzle to solve it. So there's various places where these components are coming together. It is an exciting opportunity all around.
And just to give you a perspective, and I see role reversals here where Brian is throwing up a question. Right, I like that. But just picking up on that perspective, from a vendor perspective, obviously we are engaging with service provider friends of ours, but we have started to take a very pragmatic approach of a persona-based. Are you a security engineer? Are you a network operations engineer? Are you a planning engineer? And associating in that persona and then drawing the current process and introducing agents, not bots, agents, into each part of it where LLMs or traditional AI can be used to get the acceleration. And I think that's becoming an anchor project or an anchor use case tied to a persona, using technology where needed, when needed, and then finding resolute with clear quantifying outcomes in 3 months, 6 months timeframe.
And it's not a one size fits all, to your point.
No.
This has to be customized for those operations, because quite honestly, if that agent isn't useful to me, I will not use it, and I don't have the adoption that we want.
Yeah, and network planning guy versus a security person versus someone who's designing networks and someone who's caring networks. And the needs for these agents is going to be diverse. And no one single LLM would feed in, or any other model would feed in. I mean, LLMs is the wrong way, as you were saying, multimodality is here. So no one single model is going to feed into all these diverse personas and diverse use cases.
And Jitin, if I can explore this a little bit more, when we talk about reliability and agents and usefulness, and I'm going to cast your mind a little bit back to something that Raj said before. It's interesting, and talk about reliability is so important. And there's always this big debate in telco versus open source proprietary models, and how we kind of use that. And again, that's the contextualization which becomes so important. It's also kind of the safety and the security in and around open source models. A lot of nervousness, particularly when we're getting down into the core network, right, which becomes so important. So, Jitin, can you explain a little bit more about Nokia and what you guys are doing to manage that balance between open source toolkits and proprietary ones? And, people like open source who think, hey, it's cheaper, but we've still got to understand those fine-tuning capabilities as well. So can we explore that a little bit more?
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good question. And I'm actually very comfortable because I've got Google on the panel, so I can talk all day long about open source because they're good supporter of it, and AT&T. So it's the best panel to talk about open source. We at Nokia are very big fan of open source communities and adopting open source. And we don't believe that software stacks should be or should not be built without using these open source technologies. And that's true to AI and generative AI. What you're seeing is, we talk a lot about models, and anyone who is knee-deep into building large language model operations practices, is just not about the models. You're doing RAGing, you're doing fine-tuning, you're doing data annotation, you're doing data vectorization. I can go on and on and on. And each of these sub-communities of technology has very rich open source software available to us. So the point being here is, two aspects of it, and I'll make some provocative comments about here, that we as telcos are a very cost-sensitive industry, right? So that's one thing to note for. B, the security, privacy, and the regulatory aspects of it with the kind of data as we deal with, on-prem versus cloud, how much would stay on on-prem, critical workloads versus non-critical workloads, that's a very sensitive piece. And the recent chapter of moving to cloud has taught us that. The rate of inception into cloud, migration into cloud, and all of that, right? So if you mix these two things, the control points with the open source communities and various levels of building this large language model operations, using open source components when you need it, where you need it, building on-prem stacks, and reducing that cost of tokenization that's being talked about is a very, very powerful thing. And we at Nokia is realizing that. Obviously, just like AT&T, which has got huge data centers, we got data centers huge, operating round the clock because we're serving the 350 service providers. Now I'm rebalancing my data centers between serial compute and accelerated compute, right? Because we realize that this technology is here to stay. We need to leverage OpenStack technologies to build these LLM operation stack, build these agents in all persona-based frameworks, and has to scale. So we're finding it very, very powerful. We are contributing. We are absorbing it. I call ourselves building up a model farm, model garden strategies behind it, where no one model will fit in. We are working very closely with Gemini. We are working with NVIDIAs. We are working with H100s, and we are working with AMDs as well. So we believe in an open community big way.
And Raj, I want to pull on you with this, just to what Jitin was saying there is so interesting. It touches on kind of economics, and we've talked about cloud economics. Now we have to think about, AI economics. And really, you can't have AI without cloud and open source. And this is really at the heart of it. So, with that, how are you able to manage that kind of economic feasibility and what you're talking about, on-prem, off-prem, in the cloud, local cloud, public cloud? What's AT&T's approach to that? Particularly network data is very sensitive.
Yeah, so I think, we began the journey like everybody else with LLMs and agentic RAG. And kind of seeing where that cost equation is leading us. We've kind of started now, the last few months, working on these network foundation models that is based on our internal data, and again, looking at it on a multimodal basis, not just the tabular data sets, but also geospatial data, other sets. And it provides kind of a unique way to think of these as domain-specific models that allow higher performance with a lower unit cost per token. In terms of training and inferencing from on-prem to cloud, there are some unsolved problems there, and I think as an industry that I think we're trying to kind of work to solve. So the first is fractional GPU usage to have multiple workloads share a GPU. Not very mature yet. I think there are some capabilities there. We really need to push that because getting to that fractional GPU lowers that unit cost. The second is orchestrating on-prem training to execution and inferencing in the cloud, and to kind of have it most seamlessly. There are some problems that I think, ironically, in the SDN controller world and the path we took to virtualization and containerization, we solved in the core network. We're trying now to bring that into this domain for operators where we want to leverage the vast pools of data on-prem and what we are building in the data marketplaces in the cloud. So that's kind of the balance we're trying to thread here, but still pretty early on the curve to kind of work the cost model.
And Brian, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about this, because telco is a journey, and sometimes we're on a bit of a long journey, to go. And we've often been talking about a cloud-native, telco, and we're not quite there. We talk about it, but now we want to talk about being an AI-native telco. But you kind of need one before the other. So, what's your thoughts on this, Brian? Are we moving fast enough, and how do we really get to become this cloud-native, AI-driven telco industry?
Yeah, no, I don't think we're moving fast enough is the reality. I think as an industry, we have to pick up the pace. We're looking across all industries once again and seeing how it picks up. And, I was kind of born and raised in the industry doing wireless networks and wireline networks. And we feel we're very special because of that network, but we can't let that inhibit our growth and our speed. Let it become the advantage. And I think, it's the ecosystem, not one company, that can bring that about. So that's the step, going from monolithic to cloud native to an AI native. You're seeing AI nativeness being inserted in parallel with cloud native aspects. And that's why we're working with, Nokias and the operators, and it's not a individual company. Doing things with the Linux Foundation, creating that open environment and really driving that. becomes critical. And that's why we have standards like TM Forum, and I'm seeing TM Forum evolve too.
Yeah.
This isn't the stale kind of industry forum that it once was. I hate to say that, but it is evolving, and I feel good about where we're going as an industry. And I do feel like we need to pick up the pace, but we are conservative when it comes to the network.
Yep.
You're seeing a lot more speed on the IT side of the house, and I think there's a lot more intricacies to figure out as we roll out the network. But I mean, we can fix simple things. Think about, I remember going down to my switch in the Carolinas, and brand new one, boom. What are you doing? He's turning off all the alarms. He goes, those things bug me. You just turned off all the alarms to your network. AI can take care of that. Because we're obviously raising alarms for people that aren't going to use them. It's not actionable.
Right.
You have to create actionable moments. So I think we're on a better trajectory now. I think we can, and we will see in the next 2 years an acceleration. But it is just like, there are cost pressures, and we understand that. So I don't know.
We are all evolving.
I'll just make I agree. I think we can't move fast enough. I think we refer to 5G as being born in the cloud. I think 6G will definitely be born in the AI ecosystem. But that's too late, okay? I don't think, and certainly not something our CFO wants to hear, that we're waiting for 6G for that. We will, I think, embark on a lot of that being opportunistic right now in the current view. But I would say in that time continuum, I think it is that kind of path.
No, I think if I chime into that, and you see the restlessness here, right? Restlessness from a cloud provider, surely from a service provider, and obviously from the vendor equipment. I think the fundamental piece to this is, and the onus is on all three of us, right? As general communities of building new age networks. And the onus is on us working with a cloud platform player to build up workloads and applications that live and breathe in autonomous ways on cloud. We haven't done a great job at it. And I'll say it out loud, right? So we need to bring faster, simplified solutions, whether it's living on the networks, whether it's living on the automation, whether it's living on the analytics or the security pillars of how the networks are built around it, right? So that agility, speed, scale, simplification needs to come out. But at the same time, the onus of first design principle of automation, autonomous decision-making, and autonomous operation has to come out from service providers as well. Right?
Absolutely.
Where the money needs to be invested, where the money needs to be spent. And I think, so the onus is on all three of us.
We've got to work together as an industry, and that's what's so important. As Brian said, we're all evolving, including TM from where we are. Unfortunately, it's got about concluding thoughts time, and this panel's gone so fast, and I've got so much more to ask looking on this. But delighted TM Forum to return back to the Americas region, and we're going to come back next year and continue this conversation. And let's pretend we're now this time next year, and we're on the same panel, and we're having the same, discussion. Jitin, I'll start with you, and we'll go down. Just keep it quite short if we can. What needs to have changed in order for me to sit here and us to have a different conversation and we've moved the dial? Because as we said, we're restless. We need to move faster, and we can't just keep saying it. We've got to put this into action. So, Jitin, where's your $10 bet going to say, and what we have to change, to move this conversation forward for next year?
I think, I'll put it very simple and very short, that we need to be very pragmatic. Don't boil the ocean. Take a specific use cases, specific domains, specific areas. Let's solve these problems and solve these problems at scale on those 2, 3, 4 specific areas. It's a very interesting technology. Building a POC and a trial takes 2 weeks. Building something at scale is an enormous task. And I think for this industry, with the kind of cost pressures we have, the kind of top line pressures we have, let's pick up. If it's care, if it's services transformation, if it's security transformation, pick the verticals, build things at scale. And that's what I want to see next time around when we come. We talk about 1 or 2 use cases that has been rolled out at scale.
Rod, is that possible? What were you going to talk to me about this time next year?
Well, I really hope we've conquered and bent the cost curve on AI costs, and really found a way to accelerate those domain-specific foundation models. And if I were to kind of maybe be even more optimistic, we've solved the problem of hallucination and unlearning, which are kind of...
Yeah, we didn't even get time today to talk about hallucination. It's a topic on its own. Brian, final word from you.
Ease of use and adoption. Ease of use creates adoption.
Yeah.
Absolutely critical to
there.
do this. Well, a big round of applause, Jitin, Raj, Brian, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Raj.
Brilliant.